As you've probably surmised by now, I had an extreme emotional reaction to this. You don't even have to know an ex-vegan personally to experience this, I think. But generally speaking, I feel like vegans feel very betrayed when they hear about ex-vegans, right? And it's stupid. It's not like he made this post to betray me or my fellow vegans, right? Like, it wasn't about that, I don't think. But you feel that. If you have that camaraderie with your fellow vegans, you know, you can meet someone and have absolutely nothing in common. But you have this in common. This that matters so much more than any other trivialities, you know, at least you have this in common.
Something I've said to many of my fellow vegans, normally by Skype, sometimes face-to-face, I've said to them openly and directly, look, if you stop being an activist, or if you never become an activist, I still want to be your friend. I've said that many, many times. And some people get it, and some people don't, and some people take a minute, and then they really understand what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. I said to one guy, look, I don't know what your next job is going to be. He was, at the time, really a very active vegan activist. I said, you know, you could get a job on a cruise ship, you could join the army, you could get a job as a real estate broker. You could just get a busy job. But vegan activism might disappear from your life. I still want to know you. I still want to stay in touch. I still want to be your friend. In contrast to some other vegans like Direct Action Network, I do not see activism as the moral baseline. I do not see activism as something everyone is obliged to do. I definitely do not see activism as something everyone can do. My current circumstances, living in a school in China, aside from making snarky remarks to the other students at this school, there is absolutely no activism in my life. No direct hands-on activism while I'm living in China. None. And again, if you get a job on a cruise ship, unless you want to make snarky remarks while you're swabbing the decks or washing dishes, there is no activism in your life in that kind of job either. Any of you guys who have a job on a cruise ship who are managing to watch this video, feel free to write in and send me some email. I'd love to hear contrary. But what if they stopped being vegan? What if it wasn't that they stopped being a vegan activist? What if it was that they voluntarily, you know, not being forced, not being in the army, not being trapped on a desert island? What if those people actually went back to eating meat, wearing leather, drinking cow milk? As friendly as the gesture is to say, look, I still want to know you, even if you have nothing to do with vegan activism in the future, for whatever reason. Do I still want to know them if they stop being vegan? Probably not. Probably not. I can think of extraordinary circumstances, extraordinary reasons why people would go back to eating meat. And I can think of extraordinary people where the person is so extraordinary that you still want to know them and be friends with them, even though they're going back to eating meat. But if we're really being honest about the ex-vegan thing, I probably don't want to be your friend anymore. I don't think that reflects well on me. I don't. I say all the time on the channel, I'm not a nice guy, you know. And these feelings, I think, reflect an interesting fissure in how we think about veganism, how we think about veganism politically and intellectually and emotionally. Because on the one hand, veganism is a diet, and we think about it as a diet. And on the other hand, we think about veganism as a social movement, even if it is not a social movement in our lives. Okay? Now, what do I mean by that? You may be watching this in Berlin. You may be watching this in London, England. You may be part of a real social movement connected to veganism. You may be. But the vast majority of people watching my channel are not. The vast majority of people watching this, well, one of the reasons why there's so much dynamism, so much energy on YouTube and digital veganism on the internet is that so many vegans live alone, that they're struggling against loneliness and isolation. They're not a member of any kind of movement, any kind of vegan organization. They may not have a single vegan friend, or in their city they may have one or two vegan friends they struggle to get along with. They may feel deeply alienated from their own families going to Thanksgiving, going to any holiday, Christmas, festival, to be with people who drink alcohol and eat meat, and where that's the whole focus of their lives, of the non-vegans' lives around them. Obviously, alienation from your coworkers. Here, it's a very real barrier between me and the other students at the school, the fact that I'm vegan and they're not. And it comes up, not every day, but the reality of that. Be a separate video if I start telling funny stories about that. The idea that veganism is a movement is misleading. It has the potential to be a movement. It has the potential to be many movements all around the world. And you may be one of the lucky people in Berlin or London or what have you. You may be part of a dynamic movement that makes your life more meaningful, more rewarding. And you may be part of a highly organized vegan group. But if so, recognize you're in a tiny minority. And one of the reasons why there are so many of us on the internet trying to get connected, trying to meet one another. I try to encourage that through my Patreon group, is for people to get usefully, make friends, get organized, figure out how we can work together. Even if it's on a small project like making an illustrated children's book. I'm still into that, by the way. I think we've got like 5 graphic designers in my Patreon group. Seriously, like 5 of my Patreon supporters are graphic designers. So there's still this possibility of making and publishing a children's book about veganism. As I've said before, activism can mean different things to different people. It's not necessarily standing on the street and screaming. All kinds of productive ways to use your time, try to make the world a better place. But thinking about veganism as a movement, even if you are not in any way in contact with the movement, even if you're alone or you just eat a vegan diet and are in no way politically active, thinking about it as a movement tends toward exclusivity, which is fine. I'm here to be honest about that. I'm not here to say exclusivity is a bad thing. Thinking about veganism as a diet tends toward a kind of world-embracing inclusivity. And I have talked about that at length on this channel. If you're new, you haven't seen those videos, that's a while back. I said many times on this channel, if veganism is for everyone, then it's not just for people you like, it's not just for people you agree with, it's not just for people who share your political values. Right? If you're left-wing, how do you feel when you meet a vegan who votes for Donald Trump? How do you meet vegans who are right-wing? How do you, if you're an atheist, I'm a nihilistic atheist, can you really cooperate with a vegan who was born and raised Hindu? Can you really cooperate with a vegan who was born and raised Christian, Mormon, Jewish? Yeah? And I've seen that. I mean, most people in my life are left-wing because I spend all this time on universities. The range of political views among my professors goes from left-wing to communist. There's almost nobody in the middle. Definitely nobody conservative or what have you. Within the vegan demi-monde, it's quite possible that the only people you're dealing with are far left-wingers or are hippies or what have you. And my political realism, in most countries, I'm somewhere near the center. Depends what political spectrum we're talking about. I'm a kind of pragmatist who's often in the middle of the political spectrum. But do you have it in your heart to really reach out to and cooperate with someone who is, for example, a conservative Christian? Now, I keep saying I'm not a nice guy, but I can tell you that I do. And I've had some odd moments with other vegans where I mention, another vegan I've been talking to or trying to work with, and they go, oh, yeah, she's Christian. And you can feel the chill. Yeah, well, I'm overtly a nihilistic atheist. Anyone who's Christian who has the fortitude to watch this channel and put up with my openly atheist musings, I appreciate that you've got it in your heart to come here and find common ground with me. And I've got it in my heart to find common ground with you. But if veganism is for everyone, and as a diet, we believe it is for everyone, if you believe it is for everyone, then that really has profound implications, intellectually, emotionally, and politically, for embracing others, inviting others in, etc. But that is to veganism thought of as a diet. As a movement, as a community, in terms of actually having an organization, then you get into these much more difficult questions of exclusivity, right? it's really interesting to me how many people completely misinterpreted what I thought was so clearly stated in my video that's titled in English, On Community. That video has been translated into Spanish, into German, into Finnish, not yet Swedish, Chinese. The title is slightly different, but the video On Community. People wrote into me saying, oh, well, if you support the idea of a vegan community, that means you support the idea of inviting everyone, of including everyone, of embracing everyone. And I've had to write back to people saying, no, it doesn't. Community is exclusive, not inclusive. And every single example I give in that video is exclusive. Communities do confer benefits. They pool their resources, and that video talks about that a lot. They work together towards common goals. But they are not all-inclusive. Not at all. And none of those examples are inclusive. How inclusive is the gay community? That video more than 10 times mentions that it talks a lot, probably talks about the gay community more than any other example, as a significant precedent that vegans need to learn from the success of the gay rights movement and organized gay communities in places like Toronto in the Western world. We're not talking about Saudi Arabia, as that video mentions also. Do you think the gay community includes everyone? I don't think it includes me. I'm a completely heterosexual man. Furthermore, I've praised, the gay rights movement in its capacity to, cooperate, to be effective, but at the same time to recognize its own fractious and fragmentary nature, right? Gay groups tend not to get along that well with lesbian groups, with bisexual groups, with various specialized transgender groups, anywhere, Toronto, what have you. You look at the actual structure of an LGBT movement, it's not one movement. It's a whole bunch of separate movements. That video mentions it, other videos mention it. So they really have the capacity to cater to different specialized interests, just different forms of socialization. People want to have separate club nights. People want to have separate social events. But they also want to have separate legal representation. They want to have separate voices in the movement. It's wonderful. It's great. And it recognizes, again, this true diversity within what we can call as one category, gay rights. Right? Now, if you're in a very small town, of course, you don't have that luxury. I think, if you go to Albuquerque, I remember being in Albuquerque. I remember going to the only gay club in Albuquerque at the time. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe the others are secret. But I remember there was one gay nightclub in Albuquerque. So the gays and the lesbians and all the different categories of trans, they all had to get along at the same gay club. So good. But anyway, Toronto is not Albuquerque. And, obviously there are towns out there smaller than Albuquerque too. So this is out of date. Probably today. Probably Albuquerque has 10 gay clubs today. Whatever. But fundamentally, I remember I went to a Jewish community once in Victoria, BC. I went once, and it did freak me out. There were some people there at this event who were not Jewish and who had no connection to Judaism and no interest. And the question is, why are you here? The same would be true. Toronto had a huge, well-organized Jamaican community. We had different community groups for each of the islands. Jamaicans have a separate organization from Haitians. Haitians have a separate organization from Dominican Republic, and they do cooperate. I mean, just what I described loosely with gay community. The fact that you have cooperation doesn't mean you don't have separate representation and separate, genuinely exclusive community groups. That's community. But what I was going to say just briefly, it would be weird if I just showed up and tried to hang out at a Jamaican event and there was no reason for me to be there. There's no connection between me and the Jamaican community. If I'm married to a Jamaican woman, that's different. If I've been studying the history and politics of Jamaica at university, that's different. If I just got back from Jamaica, if I'm a white person, but I've been living in Jamaica and involved in Jamaican political issues or Jamaican culture, if there's some meaningful connection, then maybe I can show up at a Jamaican community event and maybe they'll accept me and maybe we'll build bridges. Maybe they'll reject me. Maybe they don't want me there, right? But all community is exclusive. There's always exclusivity. There's always a question of whether or not you're admitted. And it's the other examples used in the video, Judaism, Mormonism, they're all exclusive. They're not This is not like the idea of the diet, where it's for everyone, and on some level everyone's welcome, and the challenge to you is, can you really be welcoming and accepting enough if you believe that veganism is for everybody? Beyond that, so already, community is exclusive. When we move from community to effective activism, to actual organizations, those are way more exclusive, because now we really require you to be a highly effective person, right? So, I mean, you have, we're thinking back over the last 50 years, gay communities, which again, as I've said, they include things like nightclubs and restaurants, but they also include legal funds and lawyers' offices and what have you. Active gay rights activists. This is a much smaller number of people within that community concept. Extremely exclusive. Not just anyone can join, not just anyone can participate. And again, the idea of the street protest, it's a very misleading paradigm. The people who are really doing the work, who are really putting in the hours, ultimately people who are making financial commitments or financial sacrifices to work long hours over many years in gay rights as a movement. This is a much more narrow category of people. Now again, like in Toronto, we talk about the Caribbean community. Within that, you have specific organizations, Jamaicans, Haitians, Dominicans, etc. Anyway, goes on and on. And they do sometimes organize big events that are for all Caribbeans. But someone who's a dedicated organizer, not even their full-time job, but their part-time job, someone who's really putting in the time, who do they work with? Do they work with anyone and everyone? Do they have open meetings where anyone can show up, like a street protest or like a street festival or street party? No. They have to cultivate friendships with colleagues who can really get the work done with them, right? Community is exclusive. Friendship is unequal. You may have some friends who are gambling addicts. You may have some friends who are drug addicts. You may have some friends who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, or diagnosed schizophrenic, but you may have a friend who's diagnosed with manic depression, what have you. You may have a friend where you like them or you love them, you appreciate some things about them, but they have some mental problems, they have some limits for what they can do. You may have a friend, you like them, they're just disorganized. They can't show up on time. They can't get work done. They can't be relied on. Okay? A friend or a colleague who you actually rely on to be part of an organized political movement with you, where you say, this is someone I trust enough to sign checks on the same bank account. This is someone who is, part of the same political movement in that strict sense of the term. Not a bunch of people on Facebook giving each other the thumbs up, where you really work together. And again, ultimately, there's a financial sacrifice involved, even if it's just time. It's time you're taking where you're not at work, you're not with your family, you're not dating, you're not skiing, you're not living self-indulgent, where you're devoting time to a real political movement. Again, whether that's gay rights, or Caribbean community activism, or veganism, it's very exclusive. It's very demanding, right? So this comes back to this contrast I'm alluding to. The feeling of sorrow at losing a fellow vegan under that heading of veganism as a diet, and it's for everyone. In contrast to when you're really trying to get stuff done, when you're really thinking about veganism as a movement, whether or not you really have contact, we're just conceptualizing it as a movement. You may have no contact with a real movement, with a real political organization. And then someone shows themselves to be a flake, someone shows themselves to lack the discipline necessary to be a vegan, and you think, good, one less flake for me to deal with, one less flake wasting my time. Poison leaving the body, weakness leaving the organization. I don't need you. I need to work with people who can show up at time, organize lunch. I need to work with people who are rewarding my level of commitment with their own high level of commitment, high level of competence. I need to work with people who don't just have the self-discipline necessary to eat a vegan diet, but who over the next 5 years, over the next 15 years, are really going to make something positive happen. So again, veganism as a diet, this kind of global, all-encompassing, all-embracing, all-accepting focus that brings with it a kind of strange emotional undertow of feeling so sad when people leave it, when people fail at it, when people go back to eating meat for whatever reason.
But you have this in common. This that matters so much more than any other trivialities, at least you have this in common. So, when they reject that core belief that you have in common, it does feel like betrayal. There's so few vegans as it is.
And then there's a much more exclusive concept of community. Because all community involves exclusivity. The Jewish community is not all-inclusive or all-embracing. Either you're Jewish or you're not. The Jamaican community is not all-inclusive and all you're breaking. Either you're Jamaican or you're not. And again, maybe you're Caribbean, but you're not Jamaican. Maybe you can participate to some extent without being Jamaican. Maybe there's some role for you, but maybe not. Maybe they're going to exclude you. Maybe they're going to tell you you're not welcome at the party because you're not Jamaican. This is part of the reality of the exclusivity of community, right? And again, gay rights, gay community. I'm not gay. I'm probably welcome in some places and not others. There's some events and not others. Ultimately, the gay community is exclusive, and part of the strength of the gay community is in recognizing how fractious and fragmentary it is, that gays and lesbians cooperate to some extent, and in other events are mutually exclusive. All the little categories for different forms of transgendered people, different rights movements, different professional organizations, just the Gay Teachers Association, the Gay Architects Association. There can be really important political struggles linked to professions that way, or linked to unions, teachers union, the Catholic Teachers Union, what have you. There can be all of these really specific struggles within that community, right? Community is exclusive. But guess what? An actual movement. When we're not talking about the gay community, we're talking about the gay rights movement. We're not talking about the vegan community. We're talking about veganism as a diet, vegan community, and then an actual organized vegan political movement. That's when things get very exclusive.
His feelings were that he found the vegan, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the vegan scene to be very judgmental, which, makes sense, and he felt ostracized by it. And I can't really blame him,
And we do. Like the clip I played at the beginning, we do get our hearts broken. We do get our feelings hurt. Interesting element of things, many, many ways. I'm going to close this video by saying something I've said before, which is, don't kid yourself. Your feelings matter too. It's not just the feelings of meat eaters that matter. It's not just the feelings of your fellow vegans that matter. If you're hurt, if you're upset, you can be honest about that with yourself. You can be honest about that with others. Don't fall into the trap of a sort of phony asceticism of pretending that everyone else has feelings and everyone else's feelings matter and that yours don't. When I was involved with First Nations politics, First Nations is our term in Canada. Americans say American Indians are Indigenous people. A lot of white people say things that really offend me about that in Canada, that really hurt me, that it's something that matters to me. Could still happen today. But I don't expect anyone in China, if you're born and raised in China, to be sensitive about those issues. I don't expect them to be informed. I don't expect them to care. That's our political struggle. If you're a white person born and raised in Canada, it's our problem. It's our poverty. It's our genocide. It's our failure. Yeah, it's our question for the future. And I think that all white people born and raised in Canada have a very real moral obligation to care about it, to care about First Nations. It's not just people who are ethnically First Nations who care. If you're a Pakistani immigrant to Canada and you choose to become a Canadian citizen, then I think it's your problem too. You're committed to it and you care. But no, here in China, I'm not going to lecture the Chinese about First Nations politics. And I'm not going to get upset if a Chinese person says something that's offensive or racist or doesn't care about the history of colonialism in Canada. It's ridiculous. But it was very striking to me how often my fellow white people in Canada would just be astounded that someone would show real emotion openly about First Nations politics. And that to me is the same question. Why would you think I would suffocate that? Why do you think I'm not entitled to my feelings on that? And certainly, you can be the opposite extreme. I think sometimes with racial politics, you get into the misery Olympics, as I've said in another video, where it just becomes about an outpouring of emotion. That's not what I'm endorsing here. But what is the utility of pretending that you don't care? What is the utility in pretending that your emotions are not part of your political commitment, are not part of what motivates your intellectual life, when so clearly they are? One of the easiest things for vegans to say is, I'm vegan because I care. I pursue this political goal because this is what I care about. That's one of the most natural and obvious things for any of us to say. And obviously, if you're in the tiny minority of white people who chose to get seriously involved in First Nations politics, at some point, there's a connection between feeling and knowing there. There must be an emotional aspect to it. And there is strength in self-discipline. There's strength in having control of your emotions. But the question is, what do you do with that control? The fact that you have control of your emotions doesn't mean that you should use that control exclusively to conceal or suffocate your emotions. I think there really is value in sharing with others your feelings and why you feel the way you feel, whether that's about veganism, First Nations politics, the history of Cambodia, or what have you. I've said many times in this channel, I never wanted to reproduce the defects of an academic lecture. But I can ask you, what would be the point if I came on here and gave you a completely dry and factual lecture about the Civil War in Cambodia, the history of Laos, Southeast Asia, or First Nations, or veganism, or any of these topics? Ultimately, my engagement with my audience and my audience's ability to sympathize with me is probably going to start with their having an understanding of, why do I care in the first place? I don't mean why do you in the audience care. Why do I care? Why did I, as a white person who grew up in Canada, become engaged with a question like history of Laos, history of Cambodia, history of slavery, whatever the topic is we're talking about? It's very natural for that emotional engagement to provide a first step for intellectual engagement and political engagement. And of course, emotions get such a bad reputation because too often people only take the first step. They only have the emotional reaction and they don't back it up with real intellectual rigor or real political commitment. Hit me up.